Welcome to my channel, detailing events throughout the decades. 1966. Aberfan Disaster. Aberfan is situated towards the bottom of the western valley slope of the Taff Valley. In 1966, its population was around 5,000, most of whom worked for the coal industry. Since the nationalisation of the British coal industry in 1947, Aberfan's colliery had been under the control of the National Coal Board. Aberfan is an area which seems to have high rainfall. Between 1952 and 1965, severe flooding occurred in the Pantglass area of Aberfan about 11 times. Residents complained that the flood water was black, and left a greasy residue when the waters receded. Complaints made by residents between July 1963 and March 1964 claimed there was a danger from coal slurry being tipped to the rear of Pantglass schools. No action was taken, even after several meetings between the council and the National Coal Board. During the first 3 weeks of October 1966, there had been around 6.5 inches of rainfall. The first spoil from the coal mine at Aberfan was deposited on the valley's lower slopes during the 1910s. By 1966, there were 7 spoil heaps. Soil heaps or tips are piles built of accumulated spoil, which is a waste rock removed during coal mining. During the night of the October 20th, the peak of tip 7 subsided by 10 feet, and the rails which the spoil was transported to, fell into a hole. The spoil movement was discovered at 7:30 in the morning by the morning workers then going on shift. One worker walked to the colliery to report the slip, and it was decided that no work would be done that day, but that a new tipping position would be decided in the following week. At 9:15 in the morning, water-saturated debris broke away from tip 7 and flowed downhill at about 21 miles per hour, in waves of around 30 feet. The spoil slid 700 yards down the mountain, destroying 2 farm cottages, and killing those inside. It continued to travel into the village of Aberfan. The avalanche struck Pantglass Junior School on Moy Road, demolishing and engulfing much of the school. Classrooms were filled with thick mud, sludge, and rubble. There were around 240 school children in the school that day. 109 children were killed in the school. Teachers had only just started recording the children's attendance when the avalanche struck. The adjacent secondary school was also damaged, along with 18 houses and surrounding roads. People in the village were forced to evacuate their homes. A huge mound of slurry of around 30 feet high blocked the area. Staff from Pantglass Shoal died as they tried to protect their children inside. Some children survived due to this brave act by their teachers. People who heard the avalanche that day said it sounded like a low-flying jet or even thunder. Once the landslide had stopped, residents rushed to the school, digging through the rubble, trying to find those trapped inside. The first casualties arrived at hospital at 9:50 that morning. Sadly, no one was found alive after 11 a.m. In total, 144 people died in the disaster. 2 broken water mains resulted in water being pumped into the spoil, which continued moving through the village. At 11:30 that morning, the water authorities managed to turn off the water supply. There was still movement in the upper slopes, so at 12 noon, National Coal Board engineers began digging a drainage channel. It took 2 more hours for them to reroute the water. A National Coal Board meeting that morning, headed by Chairman Lord Robbins, was informed of the disaster in Aberfan. It was decided that the Director General of Production and Chief Safety Engineer should inspect the situation. Lord Robbins had decided not to go himself. Prime Minister Harold Wilson was informed of the disaster, and thought he needed to go and visit the scene. He arrived at Aberfan around 9:40 that evening, where he heard from police and rescue workers what had happened. He left the scene at midnight. Harold Wilson concluded that a high-level independent inquiry needed to be done. That evening, the mayor of Merthyr Tydfil launched an appeal for financial donations. This was named the Aberfan Disaster Fund. This was to help rebuild the area, and alleviate financial hardship. A mortuary was set up in Bethania Chapel. Members of the South Wales Police Force helped with identification of victims. The causes of death was mainly asphyxia, fractured skulls or crush injuries. Because of the cramped conditions, parents were only permitted to go in one at a time to help identify the bodies of their children. By the morning of October 22, 111 bodies had been excavated. At daybreak, Lord Snowdon visited the area and spoke to the parents and rescue workers. At around 11 that morning, Prince Philip also visited the area, speaking to all those involved. By the afternoon, rain began falling, and it was thought that the area may need to be evacuated, due to the threat of more movement from Tip 7. A coroner's inquest was opened on October 24, to give the cause of death for 30 of the located children. A mass funeral for 81 of the children took place on October 27, at Brintaff Cemetery in Aberfan. 10,000 people attended the funerals. A public meeting was held on November 2, 1966, and took 76 days, spread over 5 months. The report into the disaster claimed that much of the time of the investigations could have been saved if the National Coal Board had not stubbornly resisted every attempt to lay the blame where it so clearly must rest, at their door. It was concluded on April 28, 1967, that the blame for the disaster rested upon the National Coal Board. They were ordered to pay compensation for personal injuries and damage to property. Several recommendations were also made, which included the need for the extension of the Mines and Quarries Act 1954, to now cover tips. Throughout the rescue attempts at the time of the disaster, shocked and grieving parents and residents had to endure the insensitive behavior of the media. A study published in 2003 in the British Journal of Psychiatry found that half of those who survived had experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. However, the National Coal Board was never prosecuted over the disaster, and initially only offered just £50 compensation to bereaved families. This was later raised to £500 for each family affected. Many of the families thought this amount was insufficient and petitioned for an increase. The residents of Aberfan petitioned for the removal of all tips in their area. In 1969, as a result of concerns raised by the disaster, and in line with findings of the investigations report, the government framed new legislation to remedy the absence of laws and regulations governing mine and quarry spoil tips. In May 1997, the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh planted a tree at the Aberfan Memorial Gardens. In October 2016, on the 50th anniversary, a memorial took place in the Memorial Garden. Forever remembering those who perished in this disaster. May you never be forgotten. Thank you for watching and learning about events throughout history.